Good morning, everybody. Wednesday, October 25th. It is 9:15 a.m. Pacific, which means it's time for another NFL week preview here on the Right Angle Sports YouTube channel. In this video, we're going to go through each and every game on the Week 8 card, talk about the sides, talk about the totals, talk about props, and give you any type of information that I think is valuable for you to take away and use to potentially make some bets this weekend. Appreciate all of the familiar faces stopping by. Already seeing the chat booming. Lots of people jumping in the chat, expressing opinions. That's going to be what I'm pushing each and every one of you to do. Leave your questions in the chat if you're watching on the YouTube app as it goes down in the sidebar. If you find anything valuable within the show, be sure to hit the thumbs up button right below. And, of course, subscribe for you to keep up to date with all the live streams and content that we are going to be doing going forward. We've got a lot of games to get to, 16 in total. It's a full slate. No teams on the bye. No rest spots, so it's going to be a busy show. We're going to jump around game to game, but let's start where we always do. Who's too high? Who's too low? What teams do we think are in the middle? So last week, we got a lot of people jumping in the chat, sharing their opinion. We've got the graphic a little bit better this week. We've sorted some things out to make it look a little bit more presentable. So we'll start here. Here are the latest DVOA rankings. I want everybody to jump in the chat. We'll give you about 60 seconds here. Look at the team's first column with the number next to the team logo is what their current rank is. Column on the right is what they were last week. So, for example, Baltimore listed number 1 this week. They were number 6 last week. We saw the upgrade. Let me know in the chat, guys, who's too high within these rankings from 1 to 32? Who is too low? I'll give everybody about 60 seconds in the chat to leave your opinion on who's too high, who is too low, and then I'll show you what I think going into this week. Last week, a lot of people were saying Cincinnati. That was a team that stood out within the rankings. They were on the bye, so we don't have any update with those two. I was saying last week I thought Tampa Bay was too high. We saw them come down to earth a little bit, and then we were also circling. A lot of people were on the Saints within that spot as well, circling New Orleans, saying that they were too high. And so we're seeing a couple comments come into the chat. Let us know who's too high within this, who is too low. And I'll give a couple more seconds before I go and give my reveal on who I think is too high and too low. So where I'm looking this week, as I try to keep these graphics a little bit more presentable overall, two stand out to me. The first being the Rams, who I think continue to be listed too high, only got dropped 1 spot for that game against Pittsburgh. I think the Rams are a team that we're starting to see turn back into that preseason team that had very low expectations, was continuously being bet under by pros. We saw that win total come crashing down. We're starting to see a bit of the flaws within the Rams on both sides. When Stafford is pressured, his passing efficiency falls off of a cliff, worse than we've seen in his entire career. Steelers were able to cause a little bit of trouble up front for the Rams. Now the Rams have to deal with it again this week against the Dallas Cowboys. Just don't see the Rams as being a team that is above average within the NFL. Very hot start. Puka Nacua got off to the big start as the receiver. Cooper Kupp comes back. It's kind of shifted the offense around. A lot more running in recent weeks from Sean McVay. Is kind of going away from the pass a little bit. So that really stands out to me with the Rams. We talked about the Bengals last week, obvious reasons. I don't think anyone thinks that this team is 21st in the NFL. A very difficult schedule. Burrow getting healthier. Higgins coming back out of the bye. That certainly stands out, but we'll keep those neutral just because they haven't played. And then the other one I have circled way at the bottom of the screen, if you can see it, the Carolina Panthers, 32nd. We'll talk about the game coming up, but I think the Thomas Brown switch at offensive coordinator makes a big difference, and we're going to see the Panthers look probably not 21, 22, but I think it's a team that can get into the 25, 26 mark over the next two sort of, we'll call it 2 months. I guess we're getting to the end of the season, but I was going to say sort of like the next 8-week chunk, 6 to 8 weeks. Pretty easy schedule with a break for the Panthers after some difficulty. Let's jump back and see what other people are saying here. Bills too high from Garrett. We're seeing that sentiment from Jane Nava as well. A couple more on the Bills. Seeing the Bills downgrade. Everyone's out on the Bills after that loss to the New England Patriots. We'll talk about that in just a second. First game on the board, so that certainly stands out. Jay says, wow, Baltimore number 1. Biggest leap of any team last week, 6 to 1st. We're finally seeing that offense turn into what we thought it could be at the start of the year. We're starting to see what Todd Monken can do within that offense. Certainly stands out in a big way. Broncos got to be last, but 29th is cool. That's the way that defense is trending. Certainly, Mickey Hill brings up the point with the Bills. Really hurt on defense right now. We're seeing Washington is too high from Garrett. 27th, what I would say is like, how much lower are you going to put them? Even if it's a drop to like 30th, saying it's too high is a bit of a stretch because they're already kind of ranked way at the bottom within that as well. A couple other ones. John says Cincinnati too low. Agree. Indy too high with Minshew. So that brings out an interesting point. I think we see, when I saw the updated rankings this week, like Browns 11th, you can say with the QB situation is kind of doesn't feel right. The Colts at 12 certainly doesn't feel right. That was a big jump for them being competitive within that Browns game. You could say that the Texans above average, maybe something that's going to come back. The Saints, probably a middling average team. That makes sense. But there's even Seattle and Jacksonville, to me, feel maybe a little bit out of place. I know there's a lot of really bad teams once you get into like the 18 to 26 range that would be tough to see those teams making a leap. So there's not a lot of other places where these teams can go. But I agree, when you see teams like Cleveland and Indy, even Jacksonville and Seattle, 8th, 9th, it just like, is Geno Smith going to be top 10 at the end of the year? Is whoever Cleveland has out there going to be able to sustain what they're doing? Defense has been great. I get it. But are we living in a world where you see DTR or PJ Walker on a team that's that high? Same thing with Gardner Minshew. It doesn't quite feel in place, but then you just wonder how far those teams could potentially drop off. So again, K-Flow says Colts and Saints seem too high. I would agree with that for sure. Detroit too high from Preston is interesting. That's the first time I've seen the Lions in the comments. Garrett followed up just now with Lions too high as well. Defensively, I think the Lions quite overrated as a team as a whole right now, just based on who they faced. It's been so easy, and I think those results have been quite inflated for the Lions. And so we'll see how far they come back to earth. But again, like, how far can they drop? Is this like 9th or 10th is the floor? We'll see. But that defense, when I look at Detroit, sure seems very, very overrated. All right, good one there. Before we get into the games, want to remind everybody that the Right Angle Sports NFL service is continuing. If you guys have not looked at the website or looked at the options, just want to remind everybody what is going on. We have the new website up today. So for those of you logging back onto the site, that's going to look a little bit different. But I'd highly recommend anybody who is still actively betting these games, following everything throughout the week, if you want to take the jump into the service, we've got two really easy options. 35 for 3 plays. That'll be the next 3 sides and totals. We tend to be releasing those on Monday and Tuesday morning with the occasional late week release. So if you buy right now and you join the subservice to subscribe, you're probably going to get something for Sunday. And then you're also going to get Monday, Tuesday next week. So these late week buys with the 3 plays are a really good option. If you want to extend it a little more, we have the 10. And then, of course, the full season for $3.95, which will take you through right up to the Super Bowl. It's the latest Right Angle Sports has ever gone with the NFL service. So we're going to have a lot lower volume than what you saw in the preseason, which did very well in the early season. There'll be a couple sides and totals per week. And then we'll have some props later in the week as well, going out each and every week. Bryce says he highly recommends the service, and I would highly recommend anybody who's considering betting these games for the weekend to check it out as well. And then, of course, we're less than 2 weeks away from the big one, college basketball. It's a big subscription. It's something that people have got a ton of value out of for the last 27 years. This is what Right Angle Sports is known for. This is called the flagship for a reason. This is the core of what Right Angle Sports does. I can tell you for myself, it's pretty incredible the amount of prep that is going on the back end from the entire team. It's been a full shift over to college basketball prep. Everybody's got their conference assignments. It's about 16 people working full day and night. It's pretty incredible to see the effort that's put in. And obviously the edge in the early season is significant. And so if that's something that you really want to take the leap into, you're not going to find a better product anywhere in the industry from a service perspective than what you're going to get from the college basketball service. And so Bryce says it right. RAS CBB is insane. Jeremy's saying as well, can't wait for the college basketball to get going. Good question. 70 plays entire season. Those 70 plays, the expectation is that they'll be complete by the end of November. Very likely just around Thanksgiving time. It's a ton of volume early. And so you can look at it as kind of less than a month for that buy-in point, and you're going to get a ton of volume from the main board only sides and totals, and that's where the edge is biggest. All the sports books have to adjust for all these teams, all the adjustments, and quite frankly, the team behind the scenes here at Right Angle Sports is far more prepared than any sports book. And so if that's something that you want to take a look at, that is now up on the website. It'll get you 3 weeks into November. It's going to be a ton of action, ton of volume, very exciting time, but a huge edge comes with that too. So check that out, raspicks.com/order for anybody who wants more information on the service to join either NFL or college basketball. Let's get to it. Here we go. I was starting off with Thursday night football. It is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Buffalo Bills squaring off. The Bills currently a 8.5-point favorite, and the total in this game is 42.5. We had a question come in at the start of the show, which I thought illustrates just the Bills prop situation best, which is where I think it's most interesting to start with this game. And so John K asked, is Shakir the buff skill position player, which we see get a bump with more utilization of 3 wide sets? They seem to get him the ball when he gets on the field in the past. And so the big thing that you kind of have to take away as you sit down to watch this game on Thursday night is that the Buffalo Bills offense is going to change this week. Coming into the season, Ken Dorsey wanted to run what he called 11.5 personnel. And basically what this was the Bills shifting to utilizing more 2 tight end sets, which they have done through 7 weeks at the second highest rate in the league. It's been a big shift for the Bills offense. Now Dawson Knox is lost for an extended period of time, which means the Bills have to adjust their offense and really revert back to what they were doing a year ago with 3 wide receiver sets. When you look at the Bills snap count, it's obviously Diggs, number 1. Then you have Gabe Davis right behind them. And then you have tight ends mixed in. When you look at the wide receivers, there's about 160 snap count drop from Gabe Davis to number 2, which is Sherfield. And so you have to debate between Sherfield, you have to debate between Hardy, and you have to debate between Shakir. And what's standing out to me about this Bucs game is the fact that you're going to have a spot where the Tampa Bay corners, a little bit big, a little bit physical. Gabe Davis is really known for his blocking and his size and stature on the field. But you think about these other 3 guys for the Bills, they're all kind of smaller wide receivers. And so it really makes me wonder if we just see kind of a big spike in Dalton Kincaid snaps with him being the only tight end. The 3rd string tight end for the Bills is also listed as doubtful. I don't know if he's going to be on the field. And so you might have a situation where Kincaid is brought in, but the debate you kind of have to have with this prop price in the mid-30s is Kincaid going to be used more as a blocker within this situation, or are they going to let him run a ton of routes? And so it's a really tricky kind of team to navigate this week are the Buffalo Bills. And on the other side, what makes this even more kind of tricky, I think, is that we saw again, incredibly, I don't understand it, Dave Canales yesterday at the podium saying he wants to find more consistency in the run game. He wants to utilize the ground game, be more consistent, and use it in more opportunities. When I look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, on the season, they have attempted the fewest passes on 1st and 2nd down league-wide. They continue to run the football on 1st and 2nd down. Where I wonder if this starts to maybe back into a game plan of success is this week against the Buffalo Bills, who have a banged-up defensive line. They won't have Matt Milano, and when he's not on the field, the run splits for this Bills team completely fall off of the cliff. This is going to be one of the easiest run defense opponents that the Buccaneers have faced in the last couple of weeks. When you look through the schedule of teams that the Bucs have faced, it's consistently been top 10 run defense opponents the last month. And so there's been a big drop-off in success from the Buccaneers running game. Rachaad White has been as bad as any running back that's currently active on an NFL roster. But in this case, with Canales continuing to want to run the football and the Bills' inability to stop the run, I kind of feel like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers might back their way into some offensive success, and that might push the Bills just a little bit. So internally, we've been going back and forth a lot, and we keep saying, like, hey, this kind of seems like a game that we're making a case and advocating for the over. And then you think about just how many unders the Bucs have got into, the Thursday night situation going on, all the injuries, and it kind of becomes like a bit of a weird spot. Fiddy asked a good question. Is this a smoke screen from Canales? It really isn't, because it's been every single week. He's been doubling down on it, and he stayed consistent all season. And Baker Mayfield was at the podium yesterday, and he's like, we're starting to realize we're not a run-first team. But Canales is like digging his heels in, and he's like, we're not budging from this. So it's an interesting kind of dynamic that's brewing within the Buccaneers. But this might be the first time all season that we actually see them have success despite less optimal game planning and play calling, just because of the situation that the Bills have on defense, which is pretty dire. Renzo asks, do you like Dalton Kincaid over 39.5 yards, Bills bounce back game? Tampa Bay is very good at defending tight ends. They're top 6 in the league. They have some good linebackers that are able to match up with tight ends well in coverage. This is a number that's moved up from 34.5, which is where it was listed yesterday. The highest close for Kincaid all season has been 29.5. And so this has been adjusted up 10 yards because of the Bills' offensive situation. It makes a lot of sense. I'm just a little bit uncertain about where a lot of these targets and distribution are going to go as the Bills go through this offensive change. So that gives me a little bit of reason to pause and concern there. And so an interesting game. The Buccaneers continue to have a lot of luck on third down. We'll see how that fares on tomorrow night. But watch this game, and it's just going to be Buccaneers running on first and second, trying to hit the big play on third. It's what they do. It's who they are. It's how they want to be. So keep that in mind. No real opinion here, side or total. People are going to absolutely look at the Bills and teasers. I will say right now, I have a bad feeling about teasers this week, and I'm not really advocating for looking at playing mini. Last week was a fantastic teaser week. We talked about them here on the show. We got into a lot of them. We had the YouTube short that went out that was talking about them and staying away from San Francisco, looking at other teams. It was home dogs getting teased up against bad quarterbacks coming in. A lot of teams like the Raiders were laying points on the road, and they weren't teams that get out and win by margin. You had the ability to tease the Falcons, a team that always plays close, against the Buccaneers, a team that doesn't win by margin, right? It was a good setup. When I look at it this week, it's a Bills offense that's going through a bit of a transition, that's struggling in a game with a really low total against the Buccaneers. There's kind of reason to be concerned there a little bit. You look at a team like the Giants, you have to tease them up. Low total, it's a good look. I get it. But again, it's like, what are you going to get from Tyrod Taylor at home? You have a situation where a lot of people are going to be looking at teasing the Ravens, but then you have to play the dreaded road favorite, tease down, and a bit of a tricky schedule spot for the Ravens, as good as they've looked. You have the Chargers, a team that is just always struggling to win by double digits. You're going to be teasing them down and hoping that they finally played to a non-one score game. They're struggling on both sides of the ball. You have the Lions, again, another team that kind of plays similarly into those situations, right? It's just a lot of tricky spots. Everyone's going to love teasers. I have a little bit of reason to be concerned about them this week. And again, it's like, if you're concerned about teasers and playing them all this week, I listened to a podcast yesterday. There was a guy that played 52 teasers on the podcast, played 52 of them this week. And I'm sitting there laughing a little bit, and it's just like a bad week for teasers is if one of the or two of these teams don't cover. I have a little bit of worry about the teasers this week going into it, unlike last week where I thought they looked a lot better. Let's get to the Sunday games. Ton of games to get to. We'll roll through these pretty good. Saints on the road at the Colts. It is Indianapolis, 1.5 point favorites. Total in this game, 43.5. Please keep the questions coming in. As always, guys, within the chat, keep them coming. Let's keep going as well. Good question here from Connor Frazier. What is a good resource to track historical prop lines as well as openers versus closers? Really good tip and trick here. And this should result in some thumbs up. If you pull up Google and you type in player name covers props, if there is an active prop market, so the page only works from Thursday to Sunday and then it goes down. So, for example, if you type in Dalton Kincaid covers props, you'll get every single market that Kincaid is listed in, the last 10 games that are closed, as well as the best current price for that prop at a variety of 10 different books. And the good thing here is the closing prices reference Pinnacle closing prices, which is a relatively decent closing price for props specifically. I know that because I know the guy who built the page very well. So with that said, That is a very good way. If you want to look at past prop performances in about 8 to 12 different markets per player, search the player name, search covers props, and it'll take you to that specific player prop page. And then at the bottom, you can go through all of the averages for the player this week or this season, his past seasons, and then there's median and average closing prices per prop per market. That's a tongue twister, but that would be a page that I definitely check out and recommend. If that gives you any value, the thumbs up button down below would be great too. Let's get on to it. Sunday, Saints, Colts. Colts, a 1.5 point favorite. Total in this game, 43.5. The over has been bet up. I think that makes a ton of sense. I'm not in love with going over 43.5 at the moment, just because it's kind of where it needs to be. This opened 40 and has been bet up. So the big thing that stands out here, Gardner Minshew and Shane Steichen, both of them individually, when you look at their stats against teams that play predominantly man coverage, the Saints play more man coverage than any team in the league. They are above the Cleveland Browns in that regard through 7 weeks this season. Both Steichen and Minshew performed significantly better against man. And we saw that last week against the Cleveland Browns. The Colts offense put up more than 400 yards, looked very comfortable. There's a couple things at play. First of all, Minshew likes to take a lot of risks, maybe not the wisest above the shoulders. When he sees the one read, though, and it's a little bit simplified against man coverage, he's willing to put the ball where it needs to go with not a lot to lose. When he has to sit in the pocket, make smart decisions, read defenses post-snap, struggles a little bit. Man coverage, pretty simple in terms of what he's facing. That's why we saw some of those big plays last week. Shane Steichen also really likes to use a lot of creative things within the run game, also likes to have his quarterback as a running option. We saw Minshew ran a couple times on designed runs. That makes it a little bit difficult over the middle of the field for defenders who always have to be kind of engaged with what's going on and respecting that run game. Obviously, Minshew, not as dynamic nor threatening of a runner as Richardson, but this Colts offense just matches up really well against opposing man coverages. On the other side, what I think stands out for the Saints is you have a spot where there's a lot of kind of emphasis now on this week being the do or die week for the coaching staff, specifically on offense with Pete Carmichael. Dennis Allen kind of called everybody out at the podium yesterday, used an analogy of crossing a bridge. That bridge at the moment's kind of on fire and you're a few steps away from the edge. And so there's a spot where Pete Carmichael is kind of up against it in this situation. And I think in a similar way that we saw the Browns have a lot of success, we now have the Saints with their run game. We have Williams back in the backfield. I think the Saints are going to be able to move the football on the Colts. So it makes sense to see this game go over. If I had to pick a side in this one, I would be looking at the Saints. But again, I just don't love the side of the total. But I think that we can see both of these move up. There was an interesting comment from Jags defenders that were saying that Derek Carr is kind of exactly who they thought they were, and he's forced to check the ball down. And there was this thread that unraveled this week where they went back and found Foster Moreau from a couple years ago saying the exact same things. And it's funny now because Foster Moreau, on the same team as Carr as he was with the Raiders, drops the pass in the end zone. And so now there's kind of like a bit of drama brewing around that. But it was interesting to see the Jags be so vocal about how they were able to just play off coverage, knowing Carr was going to check things down, rally to tackle it, give things up very easily. But that's exactly what the Colts do defensively, stylistically. So, like, there's going to be a path for the Saints to move the football. It's not going to be overly explosive, most likely, but that's something to watch as well. So I think both teams are able to move the football as well. Bryce Miller says, that's some game right here. You should post a short of this for people not here. I never knew about this resource. It's a great resource. That's why we're doing the live streams. That can help. And that's why you guys need to ask questions, because if you ask the questions, I can share some expertise. I've been doing this for a long time. I can share a few things here and there that occasionally provide some value to people beyond just NFL thoughts where you're listening for one thing to take away. So if you do have any questions, please get them inside of the chat. Paul says Olave was arrested. I don't think he's going to be forced to sit out. It was the speeding ticket. It wasn't a DUI or anything. Doesn't seem like they're going to keep him out, but let's see what happens with that as well. we'll get to the car or the OC bump in a game as we get to the Jags Steelers now. Jacksonville, a 2.5-point favorite. Total in this game, 41.5 or 42, depending where you look. Doug Peterson, and this is maybe giving away too much. We'll see. Doug Peterson in week 2, following the week 1 game where the Jags played the Colts. Peterson came out and said that Christian Kirk is going to have a lot of opportunities against the Chiefs because Christian Kirk excels against man coverage and not so much against zone coverage. And so he kind of painted Christian Kirk as this guy that can really fare well against man coverage. And if you look through the split so far for the Jags over the first 7 weeks of the season, Kirk has had massive games against teams that are top 10 in man coverage rate. All of his off games have been against teams that play predominantly zone coverage. He played the Colts twice, didn't have big games. Colts are playing the most zone of anybody within the NFL. He played the Bills, didn't have the biggest game. His targets went down. Bills play a ton of zone too. And you look at all the other games, Kirk is having these big breakout games against man coverage. Let's see what the Kirk props look like this week. I certainly think that is in play. When I'm looking at this number specifically, Jags 2.5, it feels right. I think the Jags right now are at like the peak of what they can be. And I don't want to back the Steelers necessarily in this spot from the spread because I have sort of a little bit of worry after what I really liked with the Saints last week against the Jags. I thought the Jacksonville defense was really going to struggle with their injury to Campbell, with some pieces shuffling around. And this Jags defense just comes every week and is playing really well. And so they really exceeded expectations. And I'm just kind of taking a little bit of step back from wanting to sort of go all in against betting it. And I'm typically one that overvalues injuries within the secondary. And that kind of burned me last Thursday. And so I'm looking at this spot and I'm like, okay, Jacksonville said exactly what happened last week against Derek Carr. They knew he was going to check down. They knew if they played with this deep cover 2 look, it was going to force the check down. And they really kind of baited Carr and the Saints into playing that. The Saints, albeit, had some bad plays and bad drops, but where I get a little bit concerned here is like, okay, let's say the Jags try to do that same thing. It probably makes it quite easy for Pittsburgh and gives them a bit of a relief, similar to how the Raiders played them a couple weeks ago. And that allowed Pittsburgh offense to kind of get moving. Deontay Johnson returning for the Steelers is massive. Mike Tomlin at the podium yesterday was saying it. It's like, not only does he bring back all of this production to the offense, but he opens everything up for everybody else as well. George Pickens yards per route run in the last 2 seasons with Johnson on the field is 4.0, which for reference point is like elite top wide receiver. Pickens without Johnson on the field, 2.7 yards per route run, which per perspective puts him in like the 25 to 30 range of wide receivers in the NFL. So not only is Johnson there from a production standpoint, we saw his importance against the Rams, but he elevates George Pickens too. And so where I start to kind of see some worry here is, okay, last week the Jags got away with forcing the checkdowns and were really able to protect Brown, the cornerback, stepping in Campbell's absence, and it worked out. But now this week, if they force the checkdowns, as crazy as it is to say, I think Canada gets away with it like he did against the Raiders. And if the Jags elect to play it a little bit differently, you now have the spot where it's going to be Pickens on Brown, which I think is just a massive plus matchup for the Steelers that Pickett seems pretty comfortable trying to exploit. And so there's kind of a path to it that I think stands out. From a spot perspective, Paul brings up a good point, 5th game in 28 days. It depends how you look at it, right? This is kind of the weird spot with trends. It's their 5th game in 28 days, but it's the only game they play in a 24-week span. And so they're coming off the extra rest, and then they have the bye after this. And so it's a really unique scheduling spot, depending how you look at it. They also don't have to deal with weather in Pittsburgh. It's always gray for some reason in Pittsburgh, and I observed this as someone from the West Coast, but there's not going to be weather or problems weather-wise for the team coming from Florida. And so it actually might not be as problematic of a traditional spot as it historically might be. So that stands out for me as well. A better revenge spot for Allen Robinson than last week. Well, I don't know if Allen Robinson applies to any revenge spot the way his career is trending overall. Good question from Ian Dunn. Where is a good place to find look-ahead lines? I'd like to find large discrepancy and analyze wide line movement. Let's do this. Here's a good question right here. We will pull up Spank Odds right now here on the screen. If you add the Superbook Las Vegas opener column on the left, that'll give you sort of like the true Vegas look-ahead line. And I believe there's a free tier for Spank Odds that anybody can use. And so you get the look-ahead line in the left column, and then you get to watch places like BetOnline, FanDuel, Heritage, DK, Caesars, all post their advanced lines. And then, of course, you can look at all of the line history, see where things are moving, what prices they're going to. So you can have all of that in advance. And then, of course, it updates during the week as well. And so that is where I would recommend to go for it, because you can compare 5 or 6 look-ahead lines by the time you get to Thursday in real time. So that would be where I would go for that one, Ian, specifically. So keep that in mind. If you have a desktop, it's pretty easy to download and install. Michael Berkowitz, is there any website where you can find man versus zone splits for defense? For free, I don't know. I use SIS, Sports Info Solutions. I highly recommend them as well. A little bit pricey, but they have all the tables you can search. The amount of stuff you can search and filter is crazy. It actually, honestly, probably gets me in more trouble than it does me good, but I use it really well. It's really easy to use and search. I wish they updated a little quicker. Sometimes they're about 4 or 5 hours on a Monday delayed to update, but Sports Info Solutions is the spot to go. Sports Info Solutions also powered a very popular preview book that no longer necessarily has those ties. And so you may know the drama and history behind that one as well. Let's keep it moving. Houston Texans on the road at the Carolina Panthers. You guys know what's coming in this one. Panthers +3. It is Brown stepping in as the offensive coordinator. It is the midseason reset for the Carolina Panthers. It is everything good all wrapped into one from a situational perspective, which I am just a full-on sucker for betting each and every time that this happens within the NFL. For those of you who don't know the backstory behind this, Frank Reich took over the job as head coach of the Carolina Panthers. He hired Thomas Brown from the Los Angeles Rams. Thomas Brown kind of grew up within the league, so to speak, working with Sean McVay. He is a modern, well thought out, sort of plus EV play caller by design. He brings over all the tendencies you know that are great from Sean McVay and the LA Rams. He brings that into Carolina. The Panthers draft a quarterback, but Frank Reich comes out in the summer and says, I'm holding on to play calling duties. What really stood out was in the preseason, Frank Reich said, okay, I'll split play calling duties in the first and second half with Thomas Brown. And so when you're watching Panthers games this preseason, most people probably turned the game off after Bryce Young went out. Bryce Young played a lot of very difficult defenses to start. The differences in the Carolina Panthers visually, from a pre-snap motion perspective, from a creativity perspective, from just guys in space getting open perspective, was night and day in the first half versus the second half all preseason long. That was because Thomas Brown was calling plays and not Frank Reich. Obviously, the Panthers start 0-6. There was guys that watch film who will be much smarter than I will ever possibly be when it comes to watching football. And the main issue that the Carolina Panthers have had every single week, if you listen to the podcast, you know where I'm going, is that wide receivers could not get open ever. That was a problem for the Panthers all season long. Receivers just couldn't get open. And even these games where Thielen was making these big catches, his separation was minimal. And so when you think about what Thomas Brown coming in does, not only is it just like a revival from the play calling scheme, it's a midseason reset. He's just such a likable guy from a coaching perspective. His entire scheme coming from LA and what they do creatively pre-snap is all around getting guys open and getting the ball out quickly on time. Not only is Bryce Young going to look better, but I think the offense as a whole looks better. And a lot of people are going to hear this. They're going to be excited, and they're going to go and bet on the Panthers, and they're going to watch it, and there's a chance that it comes out and it's a clunker. You have to keep in mind sort of the expectations here. We just looked at the start of the show and the high lows. Carolina was rated as the dead worst team in football. Thomas Brown coming in is not going to elevate the Panthers to like the 13th best team in football. They're just not going to get there this year. I think Thomas Brown can elevate this team to like 21st, 22nd. And when you look at the schedule over the next few weeks, it goes from very difficult in how the Panthers started to all of a sudden they have a couple winnable games coming up. So I think this is just a really good spot for Carolina, and I would bet into that, and I feel good about the Panthers this week as well. Jonathan Zhang asks, reposting in case you didn't see it. I didn't. It comes on a sidebar, and sometimes I miss it. I'm sorry. Do you expect different distributions for Bryce Young after Thomas Brown's takeover? He's been peppering Thielen. In my mind, I think back to Minnesota and the routes that Thielen was able to run with his time with the Vikings. And I don't have specific data on this, but I feel like it matches up relatively well with how the Rams got Cooper Kupp in motion a lot pre-snap and some of those quick option routes that he was running that he was so good at. I think Thielen can fit into that role well for Brown. So I think Thielen's still going to get a lot of attention. I'm wondering when DJ Chark begins to emerge. Obviously very fast, doesn't separate and get a lot of space recently. He was at one time a really good separator, but I have to wonder if this is a spot where maybe we start to see Chark open up a little bit too. But I think that stands out well. Michael Berkowitz, total move from 41.5. Do we still think there's over at 43.5? You have the Texans off of the bye, a little bit of bump there. Their offense has been trending quite well. You have the Panthers. It should be trending up, a big under team for 6 weeks. Now I think all these things makes them an over team. Makes sense why we've seen this total move as much as it has. Both teams out of the bye, extra prep. Think that stands out. So that's why the total's gone up. I wouldn't be looking under. But again, similar to the Colts Saints, I think it's kind of moved into the right number. And I wouldn't be too excited one way or the other on that one at this point. But I still do like the Panthers catching the points at home. Paul, this was still Frank Reich. That was the last game before the bye. Some good signs of life from Bryce Young on those first couple drives coming out against the Miami Dolphins that give me some optimism for what this offense could be. Eagles on the road at the Commanders. It's Philadelphia, a 6.5-point favorite, total 43.5. I was lying in bed on Monday, and it was like 9:30, and I had it was a long day, get to bed after Monday Night Football, and I'm like, okay, and it was like about to fall asleep, and I snapped up. I had two thoughts. One thought was on this game, one thought was on the Dolphins game, and I was like, I got to look at that. Jalen Hurts leaves the field limping after their win on Sunday Night Football. There was some interesting press conferences. The thing that stood out to me the most and why I think there's something lingering here, he did kind of like his best Joe Burrow impression at the podium earlier this week, where he was asked about the injury. He said he's fine. He said it's okay. Yeah, and then they're like, well, were you wearing a knee brace? And he's like, yes, I was. He was kind of attempting to be very discreet about it. And then the last question, which I didn't see pulled up in a lot of quotes. Roto World is always as quick to jump to the big headline. Hurts is fine. No. The one thing that stood out, guys, was at the end of that clip, and you guys can go watch it, Hurts was like, I hope it doesn't bother me the rest of the season, was what he insinuated, where they're like, is this going to be something that lingers and bothers you? And he's like, hope not. And there was just the way that he answered it made me think that there's something going on here. We didn't see him run a lot in Miami. The speculation was it happened the week prior. There was nothing reported. It seems to me like the Eagles are really downplaying this. And so my thought was, okay, Hurts is not 100%. Like, I got to back the Commanders in this spot, getting 6.5. They always play the Eagles tight. I got to take the points. Like, what am I looking for the Commanders? And everything that I'm looking at for the Commanders, I've tried to make a case for them for about a day and a half now at this point. I just can't get there. I think that they're still generally overpriced. I think they're generally overrated. This was a team that had low expectations before the season. We bet their win total under. Other pros bet their win total under. I'm not trying to stay latched onto that, but I feel like the Commanders have kind of lucked their way into a lot of results so far this year. And there's going to be this sentiment that they always play the Eagles close. And like, I get it if Hurts is hurt. You're probably going to want to have the points in this game. But just the way that this offense for Washington is operating, Sam Howell's inability to get the ball out of his hand, the sacks he's taking, just really leaves me concerned overall. And I don't want to end up backing the Commanders. But I really tried to make a case for it within this game. And so, again, it's another game this week. a lot of two sides that I can make a case for within a lot of these games. This is definitely another one. Rams, Cowboys, we can keep this one pretty close. Cowboys, 6.5-point favorites, total 45.5. Biggest thing to watch for. Matthew Stafford, very much struggling under pressure. Historically, in his career, he's been very good. This year, different story. Really struggling. It's been tough. And this offense, as we saw against the Steelers, really struggles once they're getting pressure, once he's forced to move a little bit. All his success early in the season, when you look at next-gen stats, time to throw, super quick, getting the ball out of his hand. All of those timing plays on rhythm were great. When he's forced to hold it a little bit, he's forced to move off of his spot, it's been ugly. And I think the Cowboys defensively can absolutely implement all of the same things that the Steelers did to trouble the Rams. They can replicate that. I think the Rams defense and how bad it is, especially within the secondary, has really been hidden so far to this point in the season. I think the Cowboys, as much as Mike McCarthy might try to screw things up at home, can hang a really big number here on the Rams. So I like the Cowboys in this spot. I think that's something that can still be looked at as well within this. I think the Rams are not. We're seeing him in DVOA above average. We're seeing him in a lot of rankings, anywhere between 15th and 18th. I think they're much closer to bottom 7 than they are average within the league. And I think that they need to be dropped down. I think we'll just see them continue similar to the Cardinals, keep on sort of backing into what this team actually is. Patriots on the road at the Miami Dolphins. Miami, a 9.5-point favorite, total 47. Don't want to take you back into the bedroom again, but this was the second game that I had the thought about. And again, I'm just like dozing off. And I have like this snapback to reality. And I'm like, hold on. In week 2, the Pats played the Dolphins very tight. Miami won by 7, but it was a competitive game. The Pats had a drive to end at the end of the game. The thing that stood out to me was the next Monday morning, there was all of the comments on Twitter about Christian Gonzalez and how he was utilized for the Patriots and how he matched up with Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill then had a podcast that week, and Tyreek Hill was praising Christian Gonzalez, the rookie, for how well he defended Tyreek Hill. And when you look in the box score, Raheem Mostert had a huge game, but the Pats threw a bit of a curveball and forced the Dolphins offense, before we knew how great they were, to be a lot more methodical than the Dolphins wanted to be. And so if you go back, you can find Yahoo articles on the subject, and it shows how the Patriots completely changed, threw a curveball, and put out a lot of 3 high safety looks against the Dolphins, and then used Christian Gonzalez specifically on Tyreek Hill to take Tyreek out and force the Dolphins to run the football and not give up the big explosive plays, which the Patriots executed to perfection. My question that I sort of had in bed as I jumped up to this was like, okay, wait a minute. Christian Gonzalez is out. He got hurt 2 weeks ago. He's on IR. So they're not going to be able to utilize him in the same game plan. You also have a spot where Matthew Judon on the defensive line, who had a big game, well, he's hurt. He's not going to be out there. Then you also have some issues at linebacker. And so Mike McDaniel has been renowned all season for his adjustments to opponents that he faced last season and all these tweaks that he is making to go from games where they struggled to all of a sudden open things up and have a lot of success. Belichick threw probably the best game plan that he could at the Dolphins in week 2, still lost by 7 points. What is Belichick going to do this week that can be different without those pieces being available to be able to potentially slow down the Dolphins like he did in week 2? In my opinion, probably not a lot. I think this is a big advantage for Miami. I think it's a big advantage for them getting the Pats coming into Florida where they historically struggle. I think this is a really good spot for Miami. However, the just before falling asleep epiphany of sorts was kind of derailed because I really think the Dolphins are looking ahead to the Chiefs game next week more so than they perhaps are focusing on the game this week against New England. Here's the worry. We have Connor Williams at center. We also have a couple other key injuries, Xavier Howard, Jalen Ramsey, left guard as well for the Dolphins. There's all these guys that are like right on the fringe of returning from injury. And the Dolphins are kind of intentionally slowing down their return. And there's a lot of talk going on this week that potentially a lot of these guys are going to be available next week when the Dolphins have to fly to Germany to play the Chiefs in a battle of the 2 best scheduled teams or 2 best sort of rated teams right now in the AFC. And so I really think that there's now a spot where the Dolphins are laying this big price tag, which is a lot bigger than what it was in week 2. We're adjusting for these two teams, but now there's kind of this spot lingering. And the way that the Dolphins are handling these injuries lead me to think that they're maybe looking ahead a little bit to that game against the Chiefs in Germany next week with the travel and everything that goes into that being different. And I think it's a tough spot. And so similar to the Eagles, where I'm like, I want to get in and lay this number, just can't do it with the Dolphins either. I think they have a big advantage in terms of the Patriots needing to change things up, but I think the Dolphins kind of have sort of a get in, get the win, and get out mentality as they look forward to the Chiefs, which is holding me off within this game. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but that's just kind of my thought. And the one thing that kind of creeps back into my mind, that game against Carolina came again in a big spot where the Dolphins had a big game next week. McDaniel was asked all week against the Panthers, how are you avoiding looking ahead? McDaniel's like, it's the best week of practice we've ever had. Come out, and all of a sudden the Dolphins are down 2 touchdowns quickly to the Panthers into the second quarter. They obviously reverted on that, but we kind of have a little bit of history here this season alone with the Dolphins starting a bit slow. Jets, Giants, New York, a 2.5-point favorite, total 36. Wish I had more thoughts on this one. We have just way too many injuries to get anything confident with the Giants. Don't have much thoughts on this one specifically. I would maybe look at the over at 36.5. I think the Jets defense, although they get Sauce and Reed back, just kind of generally underperforming. I think the way that Salah presented things at the press conference wasn't entirely accurate. They're right around 18th in like per play metrics. Just doesn't quite feel right. Giants, again, they're just riddled with injuries. We just don't know what we're going to get from them overall. So this is an easy one and a quick one to sort of move on from. Falcons on the road at the Titans. Atlanta, a 2.5-point favorite. Total in this game, 36. This is Arthur Smith going back to Tennessee and a little bit of gamesmanship. We're going to see Will Levis starting for the Tennessee Titans, but Vrabel has said that both quarterbacks are going to be used for Tennessee. That throws a bit of a wrench into it. This is a struggle for me because I look at this game, and again, it's a lot of two sides for a lot of games this week. When I'm looking at this, I want to make a case for Atlanta, but something that I learned very early a year ago after coming over to Right Angle Sports, never try to catch the falling knife. And we have kind of that brewing with Atlanta overall. You have the media angle where this is a spot where everybody is first to get in line, pushing everyone out of the way to criticize Desmond Ridder. I think we have seen in the last 2 weeks is kind of people push under the rug the passing performances that he has had. The Falcons have had several turnovers, 5 in total the last 2 weeks inside the opponent red zone. 2 of those were at the goal line on fumbles. Like, I get it. It's been these just back-breaking turnovers. And you look at it and say, the media is overblowing how bad he's performed. Everyone wants him benched. Everyone thinks Taylor Heineke is like a top-tier quarterback that deserves to be in this offense. I think we're seeing Smith work it out on offense with Ridder as a passer. But on the other side, there's this underlying issue of, well, if this is going to be a tight game like the total's telling us, and you're going to need Atlanta now laying points to win by a field goal, can you trust them to make plays late? So far this season, we have not been able to trust the Atlanta Falcons at any point making plays late when they are needed most. And so it's easy to say, like, okay, all this bad luck within the red zone is going to revert. Those plays are going to turn into points. But I just don't know if I trust it laying a number on the road against Vrabel, a head coach that knows Smith so well, knows what to expect, and is just has this long history of making things really ugly for teams that come into it. And so there's just so much familiarity between these two teams that I kind of could only look at the dog. I don't love the idea of backing Will Levis, but there's just something about this that just seems like one of those Vrabel games where he messes everything up. There's all this familiarity, and it just lends itself to Tennessee staying close and competitive and having a chance late. And so if you're talking about teasers overall, and you're talking about finding potentially a spot where there is a good teaser leg, I think the Titans certainly stand out as one of the better ones this week. But I would look at the Titans in this spot getting the points as much as it pains me a little bit with that Falcons outlook. Again, Kyle says, doesn't it seem like there's positive turnover regression? Like when, right? And this is what I'm talking about, the falling knife. You can bet on it this week and this week and this week. Same thing as the Vikings. It's just a really tough thing to time. It's an easy thing to point at and say, and I get it. it's just really, really tough to end up trying to time right. And then you might just end up backing a team in Atlanta that doesn't win by big margin, laying points on the road against a coach that knows the offense and offensive coordinator better than anyone else in the league, right? It just seems like a bit of a messy spot overall. Vikings on the road at the Packers. Minnesota, a 1-point favorite. Total in this game currently sitting at 43. This is just an ugly clunker all the way around when you look at it. Green Bay had all these high hopes and optimism in press conferences last week. Stenovich, LaFleur, we're going to run tempo. We're going to speed up the offense. They come out, they don't score anything on Denver in the first half. I don't know what you're getting from the Packers at any point now. I don't know how they rebound from that. It's just this offense is so boomer bust. There's nothing sustained. There's no identity. Even with Aaron Jones back, it was a struggle. They had one good game all year with him. There's just nothing to look at. I think the Vikings wildly overperformed on Monday Night Football against the 49ers. This is a stay away as there's ever been a stay away. If there's ever one, this is absolutely it. I just have no strong thoughts here in the same way as the Jets-Giants game. I think it's just a tough game to look at and bet either way around. Browns on the road at the Seahawks. We just got news that Deshaun Watson is doubtful. Boy, oh boy, what do you make of that situation, guys, when you're looking at that? Watson electedly took himself out of the game last week, didn't want to get back on the field after the injury. He's been medically cleared to play. He is not playing. The Browns have as dire of a QB situation without Watson between DTR and who's allegedly in line to start, but between him and PJ Walker, it is PJ Walker. Okay, so that was just confirmed. PJ Walker it's as bad as it gets for a starting quarterback in the NFL. He has been absolutely gifted in every way to potentially now be he is 2-0 on the season and have a chance to go to 3-0. The Browns had no business winning either of those games the last 2 weeks with Walker as a starter. And now they face the Seahawks defense, very good against the run, quietly getting very good within the secondary. We're seeing this total get bet down. We're seeing the Seahawks now out to a 3.5-point favorite. This was 2.5 when Watson was the expectation. And so this move very much matches what we saw last week with the Colts when it was 2.5 all week. Watson was announced in, went to 3.5. We're kind of seeing exactly what the market values Watson as when dropping back to PJ Walker, who is going to start again this week. I really want to back Seattle. I really want to look at it. It is another game this week that is both sides because I'm like, okay, I want to bet against PJ Walker. I want against this spot with the Browns traveling. I want to do it. But I just see in my mind Geno Smith forced to hold on to the football and this defensive line causing a ton of issues for him, holding on to the ball in the backfield, not being able to get it out. And something I'll say about Kenneth Walker, last week he was very popular in props. He closed 85.5. He got 26 carries. To not be able to do anything outside of one explosive run against the Cardinals on 26 carries, there was so many 3-4 yard gains for Walker against a bad defensive line in Arizona that I just don't see that going any better against his Browns defensive front. I think it puts the Seahawks offense in a bit of a problem. DK Metcalf, not 100%, missed his first career game last week. And I get that you had the kid from Duke coming in whose name is Jake Bobo, made the big catch in the end zone, kind of emerges. Without DK Metcalf, this Seahawks offense, it leaves a lot to be desired. He's just a massive part of this offense, and you take him out, and all of a sudden teams can match up pretty well with Lockett. The Browns have physical corners, can kind of give him issues. Smith and Jigba, as we know, can be jammed up at the line as well. So there's just a lot to look at for Seattle, and now this price is drifting out, coming a little big overall at 3.5, I think. So we'll see if this number holds, but that certainly stands out for me in a big way. I just want no part of PJ Walker whatsoever. Let's keep it going here as we have, again, a big card, all 32 teams in action. Chiefs, Broncos, similar to what we saw with the Vikings, Packers divisional game. Mahomes is always terrific in these spots. Chiefs offense looked really good against the Chargers, but we're seeing the Browns get bet. We're seeing this game, as all of these divisional rematches do, kind of tend to favor the dog within the market. Nobody wanted the Broncos the first matchup. That number hung around 10 all week. We're now seeing interest in the Broncos here. This is do or die for Denver for the season. You take this loss, and it's all bad now for the Broncos going forward. And so this is really the last chance the Broncos have for a season-saving victory. You lose another one to the Chiefs, there's no coming back from that one in the competitive AFC. But I certainly can't get there with the Broncos in this defense whatsoever. It was very much wind-aided in the first game for them to be able to stay competitive within that. Just not a spot that I'm intrigued to back the Broncos, and just don't know if I can get there and lay this much with the Chiefs. Boring breakdown on that one, but it's a tough game. There's a couple of games here that just not a lot to offer as well. I felt like the Browns were in a bad spot last week, but that defense can win games on its own. Absolutely true. Murray asks, Cleveland, Seattle over 39.5. Not for me. Not intrigued. The betting an over with PJ Walker on the field. Robert says it's mental for Watson. Looks like a man who's got a check and is cashing it in. Interesting angle. Robert also says, I'd take Geno over DTR or PJ for ugly games points or a premium. Yeah, don't know about that one. No real thoughts on. I don't feel comfortable on betting Geno on the road like that. Kyle says the line is moving in Denver's favor because of the weather. Snow is coming in Denver this weekend. Looking at it, high of 32 in Denver right now is the weather forecast for that one. So certainly a chance of snow in Denver and the Rockies, which would make for a fun game on the weekend. Bengals on the road at the San Francisco 49ers. 49ers a 5.5-point favorite. Total in this game, 45. San Francisco off of a bad loss, 2 in a row now, where they missed a field goal against Cleveland and then failed to convert on a number of opportunities against the Vikings. This is now, I would sort of call it, continue to be kind of not quite peak pricing for San Francisco. We're still seeing them very high in ratings, not a huge drop-off. Interesting comments about the defense. Nick Bosa at the podium with the backpack doing his traditional interview after the game. And he kind of calls out Steve Wilks, defensive coordinator, a little bit. Says, we're used to being a rush 4 team, coverage playing behind that. And this year, it's not that. And so I thought that was an interesting comment. He was very kind of stoic and didn't want to officially kind of take a jab at Steve Wilks, the defensive coordinator, but kind of shows the defensive changes going on within San Francisco. Kyle Shanahan came out in his press conference for the second time this season, took a shot at Steve Wilks for his play calling and decision-making. So that's pretty interesting. The Niners have found themselves a lot of times this season in this kind of like weird, soft, off coverage that tends to be man on the outside look that is very non-49ers like. And it's allowed teams at times to have some very easy 10, 12 play drives down the field against them. It's very uncharacteristic. And the pass rush with 4 guys trying to get home has not been as efficient in front of it as seasons past. And so the pass rush, a little bit slower to get to the QB and like kind of easy decisions for opposing quarterbacks. And I think about Cincinnati and some of their quick throw game recently with Burrow. It's been really, really good. And so if the 49ers find themselves in those looks again, and we don't see a bit of an adjustment, well, I think Cincinnati can find some success. We've, for 2 weeks now, identified that they're really underperforming, really lowly rated. What worries me a little bit is the safety play for Cincinnati. I think this could potentially be a big Kittle game within this matchup. Just being able to stretch the seams down the field. I think that matches up very well against the Bengals, who have struggled with tight ends in the past. And so that would be a guy that I would circle from a prop perspective. But I do think that we might see this total tick up a little bit from 45, as there's some paths for both of these offenses to move the football. Last 3 games of the week, Ravens on the road at the Cardinals, Baltimore an 8.5-point favorite. Total in this game, 44. This is an easy one that's very straightforward. You look at the Ravens. We saw what their offense can be last week. That's what Monken wanted it to be. That was the intention. A lot of spread sets. Lamar getting the ball out, spreading the ball around to a number of wide receivers, and then using his legs when he has to. That is exactly what Todd Monken wants. And if he is able to utilize play action and some motion pre-snap in similar ways to what he did a week ago against the Lions, the Ravens are going to hang some huge numbers on opposing defenses. The Cardinals defense has been so aggressive at times and overplays so much that I really think the Ravens have a clear path to success and can potentially put up 28, 30 points on the Cardinals within this spot. And so I think it's another really good offensive performance for the Ravens. I think team totals would be a look that could be considered to be in play. You always have kind of the lingering letdown spot on the road after the big home win, but I think this Ravens offense is going to continue to roll. And so I think it's another big game for Baltimore overall. I think the Cardinals kind of looking forward to that Murray return. They kind of had that hot start. It's wearing off. This is a bad team on both sides of the football. I think we sort of see the Cardinals have another down game. They got very fortunate to end up with the scoreline that they did against the Seahawks, benefited from 3 bad Seattle turnovers. Couldn't do anything when they had the football with it outside of one drive that got down the field with a big QB run. I think the Ravens here can put up a number as well. Sunday Night Football, it's the Bears on the road at the Chargers. LA down to an 8-point favorite. Total in this game, 46. What do you do with it? Can you back the Chargers? No way anyone can bet the Bears in this spot. I can't advocate for that in any way. The question is, can you bring yourself to click submit on the bet slip with the Chargers laying 8 or 8.5 points at home? Tyler Badgett was serviceable in the win against the Raiders. There is not a defense in the league that could have made it more favorable for a rookie making that start than the Raiders. They play off coverage, keep everything in front. That's exactly what they do. I get that the Chargers play a ton of zone, but if Brandon Staley, now with a week of tape, watching Badgett come in to LA with the time to prepare for it, if Staley cannot get the best defensive effort out of this Chargers defense, he has to be fired at some point. I mean, this is it for the Chargers. And defensively, game planning for this Bears offense, this should be so simple and so easy for the Chargers. Nothing shocks me because it's the Chargers. This is a spot they have to absolutely have their best defensive effort of the season. I think it lines up very well for them. And on the other side, this is the Bears defense that got healthier in the secondary. I get it, but I think the Chargers can hang a number here. Everyone's going to say the Chargers don't win by double digits. I went back and looked. It happens against bad teams more than I sort of mentally thought that it did. I think that they're in play for that. Boy, if this is a no-show from the Chargers again, I don't know what to make of it at this point. There has to be personnel changes because this matchup on both sides of the football sets up so well for what the Chargers do great. I worry a little bit about the offensive talent that's out there without Mike Williams. That's a concern, but boy, it's just this is it for LA. I think they show up on Sunday Night Football. Paul says, great teaser leg. This is kind of the one exception that I would have. I'm a little worried, again, as I said, with teasers all week long. But if you're looking at it, teasing the Titans up, teasing the Chargers down, not too bad looking all the way around. James Davis, with the way Herbert has looked, he's regressed. Moore has not really helped. Yeah, I mean, there's like this standard that we hold Herbert to. There's the standard that he's playing at. It doesn't match what Moore said preseason about throwing it at the crazy rates. It hasn't shown through. I get it. This game is like the one exception where they have to get it right. If they don't, right off the Chargers going forward for sure. Raiders on the road at the Lions, Monday Night Football. It's Detroit, an 8.5-point favorite across the board. Total in this game bet up to 46. This is where you would expect the Lions to have a bounce-back performance. They didn't practice on a day last week against Baltimore because they said they wanted to give everybody rest because it was the physical part of their schedule. It was just an asinine decision when you're matching up against the Ravens to not practice on a day. And then, of course, they no-show in the first half and get embarrassed. This is now a spot where Jared Goff is going to be comfortable in the pocket. He is going to have comfortable looks against this Raiders defense. The Lions are going to be able to run the ball against this Raiders defense to take pressure off of Jared Goff. My question is, who are we going to get at quarterback for the Raiders? It's tough to make a decision before fully knowing that. But I think that you can see the Lions move it consistently. I would not be laying this number with Detroit. I'm not crazy about the Lions teasers just because the Lions defense at this point is incredibly overrated. They have some defensive injuries as well on the back end that give me some worry as well, especially when it comes to laying a big number. Let's see what the Raiders have at quarterback for this game. But I think you're seeing a spot where people are going to be inclined to look at the Lions bouncing back. I want no part of laying this big of a number with the Lions on Monday Night Football. It's just such a big role change for the team overall. That we saw it once against Carolina. We saw it once against Seattle. Against Seattle, they no-showed, having to cover the big number, losing OT. Against Carolina, they beat up on the Panthers, as does everybody else. But against the Raiders, boy, it's too big of a number for me to be excited about. Wish I had more to offer on that game, but it's just, I think it's just another ugly one. There's like 6 games this week that I just find ugly and want no part of. And then there's a lot that I'm kind of both sides on. And then there's just a couple opinions here or there that I think really stand out. But it's going to be an interesting week for props as well, as we see a lot of these totals in the games very, very short. We're seeing a lot of players and their props come down quite a bit. Really stands out to me. But I do think, again, this is kind of a more interesting early game card, with the exception of the late games on the Ravens. And then looking at that Browns-Seahawks game, I think there's going to be potential for that as well. And so with all of that said, a reminder to everybody, if you want to be informed of everything that we are potentially going to be sending out this week, raspicks.com/order, 3 for $35. It'll get you any more sides and totals this week, plus the ones we send out on Monday and Tuesday next week. Obviously, the podcast airs each and every morning, so you can stay informed with things that are going on a daily basis. And something that was absolutely great last week was everybody leaving comments in the main video down below. If you had the time to leave the comments, I was able to make shorts off of that. It helps me make the content more. It helps me answer more questions. And of course, we're airing this Wednesday morning. A lot changes before Sunday morning. If you have questions on props, if you have questions on side or totals, you have questions on teasers, please take a second, leave it down below in the video once the live stream finishes. It lets me go and create a short, lets me get another video out there. It helps the channel. And just, I find it a lot of fun when you guys submit the questions and I can help. We answered a couple earlier. Really appreciate that very much from everybody. Thank you to everybody who jumped in the chat again this week. Before you go, leave the thumbs up on the video. Always helps bring the videos up in the search ranking as well and gets us some new viewers too. So that can definitely help out as well. But please leave the comments in the video after we're done. I'll be able to answer those questions as we get up to Sunday with kickoff. Again, it's a lot of fun. A lot of fun to do these too. And if you want more, check out the service on raspicks.com/order. Thanks everybody for stopping by. Have a fantastic Wednesday. Have a great week number 8. And we will see you tomorrow morning on the podcast for the latest update with everything going on for week 8. Enjoy Wednesday. Chat to you then.